What's up, ladies and gentlemen? It's your boy, the Lancelot Dent of time poorly spent, flooding your brain and the market with the opiate of the masses, which is MMA. Very strained metaphor there, but we'll talk more about that later, because Lancelot Dent's an amazing name, firstly. But it's the 22nd of August. We had a Bellator at the weekend, a small belly tour, a miniature belly tour, and we've got some fights coming up this weekend, so we've got plenty to talk about. This weekend's fight card, low-key pretty good in terms of, I looked down it and I was like, oh, we're bringing out the B names, getting the guys who aren't super famous but are still decent. Bit like Mamma Mia 2, you know, you use all the B catalogue, which they should have put on the poster. Gaethje versus Vic, the Mamma Mia 2 of MMA events. Instead, they put 18 combined knockouts, and I believe that Gaethje has 15 and Vic has about 3. So it was a very strange way to market it, but I'm still quite pleased with the look of this card, and we'll get into all of that later. It's actually been a huge week for news. We've got some good stories here. Firstly, I missed Glover Teixeira dropping out of this fight with Jimmy Manuwa. I saw their poster, which they phoned in hard, but apparently the reason for that was because they didn't expect the fight to go through. So now Jimmy Manuwa versus Thiago Santos has been announced, and Thiago Santos, you will notice, like his old friend Anthony Smith, has moved into the middleweight's quite competitive. Why don't I move up to that division of fossils market? Thiago Santos, cracking fighter, a really fun guy. Had a streak of like 8 knockouts recently in the middleweight division. Stopped Anthony Smith, so you know he's a good fighter. That Anthony Smith fight is actually awesome. He wheel kicks Anthony Smith in the face in the opening seconds, and Anthony Smith still like toughs it out for another round. He did get stopped by Dave Branch, sort of like ending his upward trajectory. But, you know, he'd beaten Jack Marshman, Jack Hermansson, Anthony Smith, Gerald Meerschaert. Oh, it was only 4 in a row knockouts. Damn. And he had a loss to Gegard Mousasi, obviously. I believe that was the one where he was doing a technical stand-up off the floor and Mousasi cracked him before his posting hand could get back to his chin. There were a couple of those in quick succession, and I meant to write an article about them. The technical stand-up. You know, it's one of those ones where you're taught this correct way to stand up, and it's supposed to bring you into stance and keep you fairly safe. But there is that gap between your hand basing on the floor, you getting your hips out and feet to the floor, and then that hand getting back to your guard. It has to go from floor up to your guard, which is a long old distance to travel. And the other thing about the technical stand-up is guys are reluctant to just drop out of it. You know, the thing about the guard is that your feet are supposed to be in the way, and it protects you to some degree until you can stand up. And if you start standing up and the guy runs in on you, you might as well just reverse the motion and go to your back, put your feet in the way again, and wait for another opportunity rather than get cracked coming off the floor. Could not have been that fight. I could just be talking bollocks. Well, no, the technical stuff was relatively correct, but he then lost to Eric Spicely after that. So yeah, Thiago Santos, I remember him being much better than this, but probably because I was impressed by the 4 TKOs in a row. And I was quite hoping that he'd pull off something against Branch, but Dave, your local Branch, just proved that he is like that little bit above. You know, he's almost top 5-ish guy. If he gets it together, you know, he came close to beating Luke Rockhold, so if he gets it together, I think you can expect more from him. I don't know if he ever will get it together, but we'll see. And Jimmy Manuwa, what the fuck has he been doing? He had that fight against Jan Blachowicz. Oh, that's it. He had that fight against Jan Blachowicz, okay, and was starched by Özdemir in the clinch almost a year before that. He's not fighting very often. Other news, Yoel Romero's out of UFC 230, where he's due to meet Borrachinha, Paulo Costa, apparently due to a broken orbital bone. Probably happened in sparring, I would imagine, unless he dropped a bench press on his face. But yeah, that's quite interesting. Bit of a shame. Yoel Romero has just signed another contract with the UFC for 8 fights. You know, that's the Anderson Silva style contract where they go, well, he's 40. If we sign him for 10 fights and he fights twice a year at most, you know, he's going to be 48 or something before we have to reconsider his contract. But then, you know, Yoel Romero, still the most athletic man on the roster at 41. Even if he goes deep downhill, by the time he's 45, I think Bellator will still be able to find a use for him. I think Bellator would love to have 45-year-old Yoel Romero, because he would still probably be a fairly decent fighter, and he's capable of stopping people, you know, even very good fighters. So by that point, you know, have him stop a few bums, and you can build him up like they used to build up Hector Lombard when he was just juiced out of his mind and smashing nobodies. Shame for Paulo Costa, because that was a huge step up in competition for him. Obviously, a lot of people thought that he wouldn't be able to pull it off, but that was such an opportunity. If he'd, that's instant title shot if you win that fight. Now he could get stuck spinning his wheels. However, he does have the bonus that Ramiro is probably not challenging for the title anytime soon, even though Ramiro says he's not going up to light heavyweight now, and he is going to stick around and get the title. And you're just thinking, it's going to be really hard. For people who saw the fights, yeah, you could sell Ramiro versus Whittaker 3, but firstly, Whittaker's 1-2. Come on, give the guy a break from the hardest fights of his career. But also, I think you're going to have diminishing returns on rematches of fights that not many people watched originally. Evan Dunham is fighting Francisco Trinaldo at Fight Night 137. That's a lovely old boy fight. Love Trinaldo, me. And Evan Dunham, he's grown old before my eyes. It's bizarre. I remember him being a hot young prospect against Sean Shirk. But Dunham announced that this is going to be his last fight, which is a bit of a shame. However, I imagine if he picks up an impressive victory, he might go back on that. But that's the lightweight division in a nutshell. You have to rack up these wins, and you're looking at a title shot maybe 2-3 years down the road, especially with Conor McGregor at the top, in this age of one fight a year. Let's do some Bellator news. Bellator 204 does 319,000 average viewers. And, I don't know what to make of that, because it was a very not... there was no nostalgia value on this card. They weren't putting someone front and center like Chael Sonnen or whoever. No MVP, no appeal to, national pride. But the main and co-main were good fights with good fighters in, which I liked. So I'm not going to shit on them for getting lower ratings. I'm just going to say I hope they work out how to do that more, but with more viewers. But then that's how I feel about the UFC too, Yoel Romero versus Robert Whittaker, two of the best fights in the history of MMA. Both of them not particularly well selling. We'll talk about Bellator 204, the actual fights in a minute. I'm only really going to talk about the main and co-main, but I wouldn't say that's too bad for not having the old men there. Bellator announced that Vadim Nemkov is going to be taking on Phil Davis in their return to Israel. That's a pretty good fight. Some people expecting Nemkov to steamroll Davis, or that Bellator want Nemkov to be a big star. He is an exciting guy in the light heavyweight division. I sort of forgot about him. Having watched him stop Liam McGeary with low kicks, he's a very good fighter, and one that we sort of... I suppose it's like Batraz Agneev and guys like that who you just sort of forget. And, who was that guy? Got dropped by the UFC. Really good Ukrainian. Used to play him on Undisputed. Nikita Krylov. There you go. No, wait. Is he the guy who beat him? Hold on. Yeah, no, I'm thinking of Nikita Krylov. Yeah, he's out of the UFC, and he was, he's 26 years old and one of the most exciting prospects out there, and they just dropped him. So now he's fighting Manny Newton, fair enough, who's had a real drop-off in recent years. And then Fabio Maldonado. Why is he fighting Fabio Maldonado? Tragic. But yeah, Nemkov versus Phil Davis. That sounds like my cup of tea. And we get to see how legit Nemkov's Sambo/wrestling background is when faced with a really, really good wrestler who just wants to lay all over him. Sort of regional MMA, not really MMA news, but I still liked it. Matt Riddle has just joined the WWE. If you've seen Matt Riddle as a pro wrestler, he's actually really good. Had a lot of trouble with the UFC because he kept smoking cannabis. He wasn't a very good striker. There are very famous gifs of him marching alternating 1-2s at Sean Pearson, who got outstruck by Dong Hyun Kim, which should tell you the level that we're dealing with. And he got boxed up by him, so that was fairly... Ooh. But yeah, he was sort of like a troublesome guy in MMA. We were, you'd get a piece of news about Matt Riddle fucking something up again. You go, oh, for fuck's sake, Matt Riddle. But since going to the independent wrestling circuit and just, firstly, not being drug tested for a recreational drug all the time, but also just being allowed some freedom of his own schedule and his own, in some ways, wrestling is a lot harder because you have to work every weekend almost, and even though you're trusting guys to dump you on your head rather than not letting them in all but the worst circumstances. But he's done really well for himself, and it's really good that the WWE has apparently WWE and I believe it was New Japan were interested in him, and he made a statement that was like, yeah, if we could do something about the drug testing policy. So clearly they've met him in the middle on that, with more and more of the country legalizing marijuana. Especially, I think he's got quite severe ADHD, ADD. So yeah, interesting that he managed to get that by them. But good on Matt Riddle. Now for some non-news. UFC 229 tickets went on sale. Conor versus Khabib. Sold out in 3 minutes. The UFC put up a big thing saying sold out in 3 minutes. What it means is robots bought up the first batch, because they will release another batch, within 3 minutes. And that's because fucking Ticket Hub, Last Minute, whoever, just have computerized process for buying up all of the tickets and then selling them to you at double the price. There was almost no difference between how fast this event sold out and how fast the last 3 events in the UK sold out, because it's not people buying the tickets, it's robots. So fuck the touts. They will be the first people sent to the gulags when I get into power. Oh, and some good news about friend of the show, Paige Van Zandt. She's coming back from an arm injury. Apparently got a fight date, hasn't announced it, but was willing to go on Ariel Helwani and not announce the fight date. And then farted on the show, which was even better. But good on Paige. She's my girl. Right, let's talk about that Bellator 204 headliner and co-headliner. The headliner was Darion Caldwell, just mauling Noad Lahat. Israeli guy. Oh, they'll get him on that Israeli card, I bet. But yeah, Caldwell's return to 145 after winning the Bellator 135 title. Returned to featherweight after winning the bantamweight title, rather. Now, the weird thing about this fight was that I was watching it and Darion Caldwell was mauling him, but Big John and Mike Goldberg were just talking bollocks the entire time. This is what this segment's going to be about, by the way. But Big John and Goldie are quite literally the worst broadcast team ever assembled. And, Big John's new to it. Goldie's been doing the same shit for 20 years and getting worse. But neither of them actually talks about the fight. Normally you have one guy who does biographical shit and sound bites, and then one guy who talks about the fight. But neither Goldie nor Big John has anything to offer on the fight, and so they just go into biographical rambles. At one point I looked up from this, and they're still telling some story about Darion Caldwell's, high school wrestling. I look back and Darion Caldwell has got full back control and has flattened Lahat out. And you would think that would be a fairly important thing to tell the viewers. And it struck me that, I watch a lot of these fights on mute, but watching with someone who's talking about not the fight over the top is actually harder than watching the fight on mute. It's very distracting. Really bizarre. And I noticed this in the Giorgio Petrosian fight way back, and I thought, well, they're probably just shit because they're not used to kickboxing. But no, they are absolutely abysmal. They were just as bad in the Gallagher fight, which we'll talk about in a second. That fight, first, when I said that about the Giorgio Petrosian fight, people were like, well, not a lot happened, blah, blah, blah. And actually, that was one of the more action-heavy opening rounds of Giorgio Petrosian's recent career. He's a guy who shuts everyone down, and his opponent snuck a few punches through early on. But here, Darion Caldwell versus Noad Lahat, he was all over him from the get-go. There was not a moment of that fight where he wasn't advancing or being pushed back to guard or taking him down, or the guy was trying to scramble up. Ricky Bandejas versus James Gallagher, again, that fight was all action from the get-go. It wasn't like a barn burner, but there wasn't a moment where they weren't actually fighting. And they were just talking bollocks the entire time. Caldwell was smashing his man, and Goldie's busy telling Big John about some cliche, whatever it was, size of the dog in the fight, normally the one that he's on about. And then he says, I tell my hockey kids. And Big John's like, yeah, well, And it's just the most asinine bullshit I've ever heard. Fire these men. Get Mauro in the booth. There's got to be a likeable fighter on the Bellator roster who can actually do some analysis. Bring back Manny Newton. Also, actually, no, he's insane. Get Mir in. Mir has experience commentating and was fairly good at it. What else happened on the card? Logan Storley beat AJ Matthews. That fight was a little bit hard to follow. They both looked quite similar, just squatting down low in their stance. One had a moustache, but I wasn't really paying attention to that. And then Ricky Bandejas versus James Gallagher, which is the one that everyone loves, because James Gallagher is a massive bell end. I had a laugh at him about his ridiculous... What is it with the SBGI team and wearing flat caps and their granddad's sunglasses? It's really weird. Conor McGregor does it all the time, and wears those big, I'd call them nana glasses, but the glasses that your grandmother used to wear. Massive frames. Massive lenses and wiry frames. But yeah, Gallagher was wearing that stuff and just constantly mouthing off. He was apparently sending this guy death threats on Twitter DMs before the fight. What a bell end. And then people were like, be nice to him, Jack, he's only a teenager. No, he isn't. He's fucking 21. And even if he was 18, nobody has called anyone only a teenager if they were 18 or 19, except in porn. Like, yeah, you are considered to be an adult at that point. Act like a fucking adult. And, he's going to continue acting like this because it makes him money. As Budget McGregor. And Bellator love him for it. Gallagher, Sinead Kavanagh, Charlie Ward. Gallagher's actually talented, but they'll just push anyone who's tangentially related to Conor McGregor because mainly there's a massive turnout for this shit in Ireland now. They love a bandwagon, and also there's the chance that Conor McGregor will turn up and jump in the cage. Now that has happened once, there is always that chance that that'll happen. Gallagher actually looked really good against Shinzo Machida. Here he looked alright. He was just coming out low kicking 1-2 and doesn't really have boxing beyond the 1-2 though. And then got cracked with the right hand by Banderas, sat down, and then a step up side kick to the face, switching music. One from my boy Lewis Smolka. Absolutely gorgeous. Sent him down, knocked him out, TKO'd him. And then did get in his face afterwards. I think it would have been funnier if he just didn't. And there was like, shame about that. But yeah, that was enjoyable. And people immediately made, like, do you remember Ben Nguyen? Well, you remember him because he's in the UFC, but do you remember that fight he had against Jules the Jackal with all the face tattoos? And Jules the Jackal got in his face at the stare down for the weigh-in and was like pushing him around, and Ben Nguyen was having none of it. And then immediately got knocked out afterwards, and people made, when acting tough backfires, like James Thompson versus Alexander Emelianenko. I laugh, but, videos like that really helped a lot of my friends and people I now know in the community get into MMA. The very famous Gong and Dash by James Thompson and the flabby, uninterested-looking Alexander Emelianenko promptly knocking him out. Do you remember when we all thought that Alexander Emelianenko was a chilled-out, cool guy? One of my favourite things about this card was that one of the referees was called Bobby Wombacker, which is just a great name. Bobby the Wombat Wombacker is a fantastic name. So that was that shitty card. And then Kayla Harrison had a fight, which I enjoyed. I mean, I wasn't super stoked to watch two low-ranked women fight, but I thought she looked pretty good. She's been training with the American top team. She's using shots. She's ducking under punches, timing these entrances on her opponent's hips well. And even though these are, technically wrestling takedowns, unless you want to be like, there's a Marotti Gary in judo, Jack. Like when people go, oh, there's hooks in karate, Jack. Nah, Marotti Gary, I believe, is banned. Most leg grabs are banned in judo now. Almost everything's banned in judo now. Don't watch judo. But even though she was using wrestling takedowns, entering on a level change is a fantastic thing to have in your arsenal. Ronda Rousey, it was very noticeable that she didn't. She used to enter on the left hook or just run in. If she had a level change or even if she could put her knee to the mat and do a long shot, she'd have had a better chance mixing things up against someone like Holly Holm, who was just ready for her to walk in. And that's one of the things that separates like Khabib from Ronda Rousey. I've talked about the Khabib-Ronda Rousey comparison in the sort of doesn't have the ring cutting and so on. He does have a shot. He will pick up a single. He will slide halfway across the ring for a double and then drive the guy to the fence from being sprawled on. He has some variety there, whereas Ronda, it was just quote-unquote box into the clinch. So that was good. I mean, if you haven't seen that, just go watch the takedowns. They were great. Right, let's get through some of the questions that have built up in the inbox. To the Gene Tunney of Writing Funny. Wanted to thank you for your contributions in helping others see and appreciate the art and science in combat sports, as well as the shit that goes on outside the cage/ring, ranging from the triumphant to the ludicrous. Brackets, your Barney Ross piece stands as an exemplary on all the aforementioned fronts. Ooh, nice, thank you. Speaking of Barney Ross, I assume you are familiar with boxing historian Kyle MacLachlan. I believe you mean actor from Twin Peaks, Kyle MacLachlan. When I heard him on an episode of Heavy Hands, a thought occurred to me. What if Slacky lifted his reasonable and appreciated interview moratorium and brought in MacLachlan on a podcast? Would the combination of strong opinions, obscure knowledge, and sardonic wit have a magical Griffin/Bonner result, or would they cancel each other out like Wonderboy/Woodley? I assume based on your accents that you hail from differing corners of the UK, but surely you could meet at an unlicensed bare-knuckle boxing event. That's pretty common in the UK now, prior to Bricktop getting the punters out of there. I implore you to strongly consider this request from your boy Rick. P.S. Optional question if it's a slow week. Given that you wrote a book on the subject, do you have concerns that Conor's heel turn in real life will have a bearing on his upcoming performance in the octagon? Outside bullshit notwithstanding, if the McGregor that tuned up Alvarez shows up, I have him TKOing a very hittable Khabib within 3 rounds with minimal minutes spent surviving Khabib's fearsome wrist ride / ground and pound. In other words, who is the worst matchup for whom in this bout, in your opinion? From Rick. I mean, that's something we'll get into tons at the time. Regarding interviews and Kyle McLaughlin, yes, certainly. I have, thought about approaching Heavy Hands and hanging out with Conor and Phil. I wanted to do it when Pat was there. No offense to Phil. But the reason that I don't do interviews and things like that is that I get anxiety about, saying something stupid or doing something stupid. Because, the wonderful thing about writing or doing your own podcast is that when I say something stupid and I immediately go, oh, that was really stupid, I shouldn't have said that, I can go back and take that out. There are loads of instances of me, I leave a lot in of me calling people wrong names and stuff like that, but I hate doing that in live interviews. I've only done a couple and I just, makes me cringe. But I have considered getting guys on for, when I want to do a 2-poddy week. It'd be nice to have a chat with someone for the second poddy. Conor and Phil are obviously top of my list of people to ask. If there's anyone you'd like to hear on the podcast, if I do start doing that, drop a comment in the comment section. Try and keep it reasonable. Probably not getting Conor McGregor or GSP, but within reason. I know a few important guys in the biz. Scott Coker, that would make for the best episode ever. Just me going, take me back, Scott, to the night of Kimbo versus Dada. What was going through your mind as Dada literally died in the cage? Conor McGregor versus Khabib. I'm going to talk more about this in coming weeks, but the heel turn in real life, you see, I don't know how much of this is real. Throwing the dolly at the bus, people can be like, well, he was standing up for his boy Artem. He didn't need to. Nothing actually happened as a result of that. The only thing that happened is that he got a ton of publicity for the fight. Almost any way that he acts up now will produce more publicity for the fight. He's learned that Mayweather lesson / Chael Sonnen / whoever. A lot of the biggest draws tend to be the people who make a lot of noise and then people go, I can't wait to see this cunt knocked out. I think that ultimately he's he's a real person who's been given too much money. Anyone with that amount of money is going to do stupid stuff and get probably too big for their boots, thinking that, quite rightly thinking that justice favours the rich. Affliction COO Michael Cohen getting 4 years possibly for laundry list of crimes. I think it's easy to get distracted by the bad stuff. And to be fair, a lot of the stuff he does is super cunty, but he's also in conversation and so forth quite a likable guy. If he loses to Khabib and he says something really humble in an interview after the fight, people are immediately going to forget how much they hate him and just be like, well, respect for that, blah, blah, blah. He's a complex character, except that now all of his worst and best moments are playing out in front of millions of people. So again, not really defending the bust thing. Total cunt for doing that. But I don't know if it's an act and something that he plays up to 11 for publicity, in which case I don't expect it to affect him in the fight at all, or if he genuinely is wearing his heart on his sleeve and getting that wound up by someone slapping Artem Lobov. The overwhelmingly the best guys at this playing the heel business don't take it seriously, and then they get in the cage or the ring and they win or lose, and then they go, well, we were just selling a fight, and everyone goes, oh, of course they were just selling a fight, and then 2 months later the rematch stuff starts up and they hate each other again and everyone buys it. So I very much doubt that he's going to get distracted if he only has to fight once a year and gets millions and millions of dollars for it. Question from another Rick without a K, Rick with a C like Ric Flair. Woo! Dear Jack, quick thoughts on the marvellous one, Marvin Hagler. Quick thoughts on him, all-time great, terrific fighter, and someone who did things his own way, and I like that a lot. There are guys who become masterful technical boxers. There are guys who look bad trying to be masterful technical boxers, and then there are guys like Marvin Hagler who take some of the principles, take some of the techniques and stuff, but jank it up in their own weird way. And it comes out better as a result. Anyone who doesn't know who Marvin Hagler is listening to the podcast, obviously, I cover MMA a lot more than I cover boxing nowadays, but Marvin Hagler was fairly safe to say an all-time great middleweight. Had a terrific series of fights with Duran, Leonard, and Hearns. I believe he's the only one to only fight each of them once. Most of them, the other three have rematches variously. Or rather, he's the only one to never have a rematch with any of them. But what was weird about him was that he was a southpaw, but he was also orthodox. Like, he switched a lot. And, that makes for a herky-jerky sort of fight sometimes. But also, Hagler said himself he couldn't get the chances he desired early on because, as Joe Frazier told him, you're black, you're a southpaw, and you're good. But I don't, in the strictest sense of things, he wasn't a southpaw. He switched back and forth a lot, but he would fight southpaw out in the open. He was right-handed, and guys like Leonard commented that they didn't feel the same hitting power in his left hand that he had in his right. He was a terrific knockout puncher, but he didn't have the same power in his left. And when he got in close, his feet would naturally switch to orthodox. So he was a guy who was choosing to fight southpaw, but when he got into a firefight, his natural inclination was to go orthodox. And it's quite a nice way to do it against the majority of opponents, because the majority of opponents you're going to face are orthodox fighters. And it's a lot easier to infight if your lead leg is like aside from their lead leg, and you can just sort of like lock into each other nicely in that close range. Whereas infighting with between a southpaw and an orthodox fighter, that lead leg can act almost as a barrier. It can make it very hard to get in close enough to do the hitting. In terms of great Hagler fight, there's loads of great Hagler fights. Everyone remembers the War with Tommy Hearns, which is just all-out action for, what is it, a round and a half, 2 rounds? I forget how long it is. It's been a while since I watched it. But it is just, quite literally, a war, The fight with Duran is good because Duran, it's classic Duran. Everyone says he's done, and then suddenly he puts on a blinder of a performance, and you go, oh, hang on a minute, this guy's one of the greatest boxers in any division ever. But Hagler did come back and beat him in that fight. The Leonard one is also a terrific fight that people argue about the result of to this day. But one of my favourites is against John Mugabe. And John Mugabe, the Beast, without being racist, he was an African guy who was billed as the Beast and was supposed to be this unstoppable knockout puncher in a very similar mold to what they did with Francis Ngannou recently. But he could also box because he won a silver in the 1980 Olympics. Ring has him in their 100 greatest punchers of all time. What number is he? 38. And when he fought Hagler, he was 25-0, and no one had ever gone that distance with him. He TKO'd one guy 1 minute 30 into the 10th round of a 10-round fight, but generally he was stopping dudes in like first, second, third, fourth. Very scary guy. And Hagler comes out, and Hagler's known as the banger. Hagler's known as a guy who can take a punch, but people are already starting to say Hagler's slowing down. He's taken too much damage in his career. He had something like 40 fights before he got his world title. Hagler comes out and he works a blinder. He's constantly feinting. He's having Mugabe flinching and wearing him out with just like being on a hair trigger waiting to swing as hard as he can. And then he starts stepping in and then KOs him in the 11th round. And it's not a clean fight. He doesn't get away completely unscathed. He gets banged around a bit. But it's sort of like the fight where he showed he had science as well as the hard head and the power. Whereas John Mugabe, he had a little bit of science, but he was mainly about the power. But could Marvin Hagler have beaten Mickey Walker, which is the one I was ranting about last week? Just delusional YouTube boxing historians. Yeah, well, Marvin Hagler would never have gone the distance with Mickey Walker. Can you imagine Mickey Walker being beaten up by a fat Roberto Duran? Yes, I can. Roberto Duran was one of the greatest boxers of all time, even as a fat man. Anyway, moving on. Jack, how do I restrain a woman? Thanks from Chris. Jesus Christ. Oh... Rape jokes, not cool. Except when made at the expense of a rapist, as Hannibal Buress famously did about Bill Cosby in a routine that brought the accusations to light and refreshed the interest in that, and eventually got Cosby sent to, I don't know, where do old black comics that rape people go? But there was a great one that I think was deliberate. I'm not gonna, say it was because I don't think John Anik would want to be associated with it. But John Anik is one of the reasons I love him is that he's so low key, like snide hilarious. When he says things like the legendary John McCarthy gets the reffing assignment for this card, the legendary Jenny Andrade gets the round 1 card assignment for this card. Oh. one of the Octagon girls did like a raise the roof gesture when she was coming down the steps, and he was like, a new wrinkle in the game of whoever the fuck this girl is. But during a James Vick fight, he said James Vick craves that one-on-one attention, and you know that Lloyd Irvin's given it to him, which is amazing, because Lloyd Irvin is one of the creepiest motherfuckers in MMA. I'm not going to go into the accusations against Lloyd Irvin here. That's something you can look up. But he does run a fairly creepy gym. And he's been, the problem is that he's a very good coach. He was an influential part of Keenan Cornelius, Ryan Hall, Jordan Schultz's early careers. But each of those guys left him. Each of them made a statement sort of justifying leaving him. And people leave academies all the time in the high levels of BJJ, Creontes or whatever they're called. But very few then write like an open letter to the community about stuff that they didn't like there. Jordan Schultz's is particularly eye-opening. Ryan Hall, I don't think ever mentions him by name, but he did write a long open letter to the BJJ community about sort of like hero worship and being made to feel uncomfortable by guys who basically you're paying for coaching. Like, that's it. You shouldn't have to be like having favors extracted from you, or like being made to feel like it's some kind of cult. And yet Lloyd Irvin is still allowed to corner in the UFC. And it's probably the reason that, if you hear people saying that they're rooting against James Vick, a lot of them will give that as a reason. Lloyd Irvin is a creepy piece of shit who's obsessed with marketing. Actually, tell you what's hilarious. Go to Lloyd Irvin's Twitter. No one replies to him. He's got about 1,000 followers. Yet every single thing that he posts gets exactly 65 retweets. So I turned that rape joke into a serious conversation about pieces of shit in MMA. Returning to the question, you restrain a woman by arresting her with your personality, or with leather straps, having asked permission and agreed a safe word. Cheers, Chris, you freak. Oh, I forgot to talk about my favourite bit of news from this week. Bryce Mitchell power drilled through his nutsack. Take that in for a moment. In a very poorly written, probably because he was on morphine, Instagram post, Bryce Mitchell said, "Yep, sorry, not gonna be fighting too soon. I was gonna go training, but I was holding a plank overhead with a power drill in my pants." I think he said, maybe I was thinking in a utility belt, but the way the story plays out, I think maybe he put it in the front of his pants like you would with a pistol if you were I don't know, a crip. But the drill goes off, drills into his nutsack, winding think about it, winding it around. He has the wherewithal to turn the drill back the other way, undrill his nuts, and then go to the emergency room, which I'm so impressed by. I'd probably just curl up in a ball and scream for help. That's what I do in that situation. Don't fuck with your junk. It's just, the worst thing you can possibly do. If you recall, X-Pac, he was working regional shows, went for his infamous Bronco Buster. I believe he was supposed to miss it in the spot or something like that, and slam his groin on the post, or fake slamming his groin on the post, and he tore all of his taint open and almost killed himself. Because if you've read the Babishi, you know that the prostate nerve, if you kick it, they might die. But only between certain hours. Right, let's have a look at this card this weekend. It's not a bad one. It's not a bad one. You got Rani Yahya versus, or Hani Yahya, I've never worked it out, versus Luke Sanders in the opener, bantamweight fight. Luke Sanders ranked a little bit lower than Rani Yahya. Hani Yahya has been around forever. If you know the one interesting stat about him, it's that he has the most sweeps in UFC history, which at least means that his fights are often back and forth. He also has a number of north-south chokes on his record, which is something that basically only he and Jeff Monson do in MMA. Luke Sanders, sort of bottom end of the division guy, got a win over Maximo Blanco back in the day, I say back in the day, 2016, but Maximo Blanco's name isn't what it used to be. It's been a while since Sengoku. He lost to Yuri Alcantara by knee bar, and then Andrei Sukmatov managed to knock him out. So he managed to pick up a decision win over Patrick Williams, and now he's here. Yeah, decent enough fight. Drew Dober's back after that barn burner with Frank Camacho. Loved that fight. He's fighting John Tuck, who hasn't fought since June 2017 when he beat Takanori Gomi. God, Takanori Gomi, how far have you fallen? That seems like it should be a layup for Dober at this point, to be honest. Though I think Dober was competing at welterweight and this is now lightweight. So yeah, it'll be interesting. Kalindra Faria versus Joanne Calderwood at flyweight. Calderwood I like, but she's just sort of dropped off a bit really hard. Her boxing never really caught up with her nice knees and kicking. And the thing about being worried about takedowns is that it makes kicking a lot harder too. She's always done well with her elbows. I think like most of all she should be focusing on a jab. Just you saw how good or how well Jędrzejczyk did even against the same opponents like Jessica Andrade with movement and a jab. I mean, takedown defense is obviously one thing, but it's a lot better to be drawing someone on and jabbing them and then dealing with takedowns where they're just about catching up with you. Than it is to be dealing with takedown attempts when you're on one leg and things like that. That step-up lead leg kick, it is the bomb, but it also does make it a lot easier for guys to just sort of run in on you and crowd you and get into a position where you're on one leg and they're almost on top of you. But I hope she pulls it off. I hope she gets a nice knockout and gets back in the minds of fans, because one knockout in most women's divisions will almost scrub the record clean for you. Mickey Gall's back after that loss to Randy Brown. He's fighting George Sullivan. Fair enough. Andrew Sanchez, Marcus Perez. All right. Yuri Alcantara versus Corey Sandhagen. That's good. People always raving about Corey Sandhagen. Jack, talk about Corey Sandhagen. He knocked out his first UFC opponent with a body shot, so we like him here. 7-1 prospect. Meanwhile, Yuri Alcantara has always been like a strong guy in the middle of the division, but he can't seem to string them together very well. Best one he did was Wilson Hayes, Vaughan Lee, Russell Doan, in 2014. God, that's a while ago. And it's been sort of like alternate wins and losses since then. Lost to Frankie Sands, no shame there. Lost to Jimmy Rivera, again, no shame there. But then more recently, he got back-to-back losses against Brian Kelleher and Alejandro Perez, which is kind of bad. But he just beat Joe Soto by knockout in February. But then Joe Soto's really on the decline too. So guys do not get to hang around long at the top in these lower weight classes. It's not like heavyweight where you can just be 40 and still trucking. James Krause versus Wally Alves, good. Eric Anders is back against Tim Williams. That is, you got the number 23 middleweight worldwide in Eric Anders, according to Tapology, versus the number 95. Sort of sneaking under the radar, because Eric Anders is very, very good. I mean, he most recently headlined a fight with Lyoto Machida, but lost a close split decision. The thing about him is that there are still flaws, obviously. I mean, he lost a fight to Machida, and Machida's pretty much washed. But I really like a lot of what he does, especially on defending takedowns. He's excellent with the quarter Nelson. He'll use it to land elbows if they're on their knees. Then if they're coming up, he'll land knees and attempt high kicks. He's got a really fun style. He walks guys to the fence, tries to bang them out with punches. And when they duck in on his hips, he uses the quarter Nelson to create space and hit them while they're still holding his leg. Really fun guy. I'm actually looking forward to watching him fight again. He could really benefit from using his low kicks more, though. Most of the time with ring cutters, generally, can benefit more from using low kicks. John Moraga versus Davison Figueiredo. I Figueiredo'd out how to say that. Davison is actually really interesting because he's 14-0 prospect, I believe. Yeah, 14-0. Been in the UFC for 3 fights. Knocked out Marco Antonio Beltran. That's a mixed marriage, if ever I heard one. Got a split decision over Jared Brooks, which is always ooh. And then stopped Joseph Morales with punches too. And, 2 knockouts in that division with only 3 fights in that division is pretty incredible. Then he's got like a mix of knockouts and decisions through his pre-UFC career. So I'm quite excited for that. And John Moraga is a fair test. Not always the most exciting fighter in the world. His striking's been getting better. He was beating Anthony Pettis. Sorry, not Anthony Pettis. He was beating Sergio Pettis to the punch. He was just hanging around too long afterwards. But Moraga obviously famous for grabbing the guillotine from anywhere and everywhere. But Moraga's on a streak of 3. He's got Ashkan Mokhtarian, Magomed Bibulatov, and then Wilson Hayes. God, Wilson Hayes gets his ass kicked a lot, doesn't he? So that'll be fun. Stuff happening in flyweight. I would think, the division benefits more if Figueiredo wins here. But if Moraga wins, that's always a good look for him, and he's got 4 on the trot. And Demetrius Johnson isn't the champion anymore, so he's got a fair shake getting back in the title picture. Jake Ellenberger, what are you still doing in the UFC, mate? It's sad watching you get beaten up again and again. At least Brian Barberena, I wouldn't call him a terrifically dangerous striker, and, in wrestling, Ellenberger's got the pedigree. But if there's one thing that Jake Ellenberger knows how to do, it's lose fights. That's sad. I wish that fight weren't happening. I wish Jake Ellenberger would retire. Angela Hill versus Courtney Casey, low-key, possible fight of the night, and that's dangerous to say because you got Justin Gaethje in the main event. But Courtney Casey had that amazing fight with Michelle Waterson. I remember thinking that she won that. I thought she deserved it more. All Michelle Waterson really did was, well, she impressed me with takedowns, but when she got to the ground, she was constantly in danger of getting submitted. And on the feet, she was getting banged up by counterpunches. So Casey looked good in that fight. Courtney Casey has her record doesn't really reflect how good she looked in that last fight. Maybe she's come on a long way. I can't remember a lot of these fights, but good on her. And Angela Hill is my girl, love her. Her fight against Jessica Andrade in 2017, possibly my favourite women's MMA fight ever. One of my favourite MMA fights of the last 3 years, probably. Just a really great back and forth between two people with very different styles. Got a couple of wins since then. Again, she was another one whose professional career, she got into the UFC after something like one professional fight and immediately lost to Tisha Torres, Rose Namajunas, both top-level names now. That division was sort of finding its feet, so she went to Invicta, beat 4 girls back-to-back, came back for that Andrade fight and has gone 2-1 since, beaten Marina Moroz most recently. Everyone was hot on her when she beat I was about to say Joanne Calderwood. So yeah, Angela Hill's things have been looking up for her. Good fun fighter. Was going to fight Alexa Grasso. Oh, she was going to fight Alexa Grasso. I would have had her in that fight. I reckon she'd do Alexa Grasso. But yeah, I'm solidly sold on that fight. Could be shit. I mean, the fight with Tisha Torres was shit. Tisha Torres just held shoulder pressure from half guard for the entire fight. I'm failing to pass at any point, I seem to remember. Then you got Michael Johnson versus Andre Fili in the co-main event. Michael Johnson's record, 17-13. It's incredible that we consider... Well, I still consider him a top guy at... well, no, he's not lightweight anymore, but at featherweight, I suppose. But, that's so interesting, because that record in boxing would be like, oh my god, no, jobber. But obviously a top talent wherever he fights in MMA. I really like Michael Johnson because he's... maybe not as a person, because he says things like, I eat my shit whole. But... I really like his style because it's quite minimalist, but he gets a lot of use out of a few weapons. Circling, using the low kicks, using straight punches. The left straight to the body, he's really good with. I wish he used that more. I believe he landed that a few times against Khabib too. It's a nice punch because you're basically stiff-arming the opponent in the body if they start moving in on you, as opposed to shooting for someone's head, and as soon as you miss, they're in on your hips. Andre Fili is a boy, friend of the podcast, Andre Fili. Thought he looked great against Lobov. Can't remember the fight with Calvin Kattar, but I've always enjoyed Kattar. Coming since that loss to Yair Rodriguez by the knockout, and he had a loss by... Well, he had a few submission losses in quick succession. It was Max Holloway in 2014, Giuffrida Pepe by jumping triangle from the clinch, wasn't it, in 2015, and Yair Rodriguez by spectacular head kick in 2016. And, there was sort of this feeling like, oh, maybe he's done now. Or maybe he's reached his limit. But he beat Hakron Diaz, who was a top 10 guy. Well, top 10 guy for a while, top 15 guy for a long time. In 2016, lost that decision to Calvin Kattar. He actually missed out on a cancelled bout with Doo Ho Choi, which would have been interesting. But he got that win over Lobov, who's not well regarded, but is certainly a big name in terms of meme value. And then he just won a split decision over Dennis Bermudez most recently. So he's having a good run lately, I suppose. It's only 2 wins in a row, but over the last 4, he's got 3 wins over recognisable names, 2 of them very good fighters. So, that division is a shark tank, but it's always possible that he, a couple more wins and he's really working himself into contention. Michael Johnson, easily the biggest name he's fought in a long time, and also the most dangerous on the feet since Yair, and unlike Yair, this guy can actually kickbox. So that will be a fun fucking fight, hopefully. You got to think that Fili's got to get him to the ground. because Johnson throws hard. He throws good straight punches and he throws hard. And those are the sort of guys you don't want to muck around trading with, to be honest, or get stuck at range eating low kicks and then running onto a straight. So I'll be very interested to see what Fili's tactics are in that fight. I think he could probably benefit from low kicking a lot, just low kicking with Johnson, and then eventually dropping, the old Sakuraba method. Get guys kicking with you, get them thinking this is a kickoff, and then just grab one leg when they're kicking. Sakuraba took a lot of guys down that probably shouldn't have been taken down by just appealing to that masculinity in them, being like, hey, I can take your low kicks, can you take mine? And on the subject of taking low kicks, Justin Gaethje versus James Vick. I'm going to write something about this immediately after this podcast, but Vick is interesting. I'm getting a big bang of early Michael Bisping off him. High pace, good at getting up when he's stuck on the floor, and really just spams 1-2s and grinds people down by that pace. Also pulls his head straight back a lot. Justin Gaethje walks forward, takes punches on his guard, often on his head, and lands hard low kicks. Has good body shots, doesn't use him enough. Great uppercut. Really does well when he's got one arm on the opponent and he's pushing them into the fence or grabbing the collar tie. When he's actually mauling guys, dirty boxing style. I think the one thing that I've noticed about Vick in the fight with... Who was it with? Actually, a couple of his fights, I've noticed that he really is a sucker for low kicks. He pulls his head back a lot, and he really leaves himself defenseless when he gets in close. He relies on his height a lot, pulling straight back. But it was really noticeable against Beneil Dariush. He would throw punches, and then if Dariush stepped inside while he was doing it, he'd be there for the counter. Dariush drew him forward, and when he kicked, he'd step in and then just crack him with the right hand while he was standing straight upright. This is Gaethje's fight to lose, in my opinion, humble opinion. But I think he could win this fight fighting like he does, but I would really like to see a change, just because he has the power, the wrestling, the low kicks and everything to really beat even the top guys in the division, but he does it in such a masochistic way. Just little tweaks here and there, he can make himself a lot safer. But again, with Justin Gaethje, we always wonder about his eyes, because he wears these massive, bulletproof lenses at press conferences, and he fights like someone, like Joe Frazier. He fights like someone who can't really see the punches coming as well as they should be able to as a professional fighter. One thing about James Vick, and I don't know if Gaethje's going to go to his wrestling much in this fight, he never has before, but he always said that he used to wrestle for, 7-minute matches or something like that, so he wouldn't try and wrestle for 25 minutes. Vick has a very good power guillotine. That's what he does. He gets up, he uses grapevines from closed guard, he shrimps a lot, and he hits power guillotines, the Buddha fist guillotine, it's sometimes called, because you, rather than finishing it overhand, you get your palm underneath your fist on the choking hand and push straight upwards. The kind that John Jones finished Lyoto Machida with, but Vick finished Ramsey Najim, good grappler, Jake Matthews, excellent wrestler, and he dashed Abel Trujillo, so he's very dangerous with his chokes. And the uppercut he landed on Duffy was also awesome. Uppercut, you never know if that's going to be an issue for Gaethje, because he keeps his chin tucked quite well and uses the top of his head to take punches, but he does duck down a lot, so you could hit him on the front of the face. I'll be very interested. The other thing about Vick is that he backs up to the fence, or he can be backed up to the fence quite easily. He does do the circle off one way, circle off the other way. Gets better at that through the fight. Was it Trinaldo? Might have been Polo Hayes, can't remember. Oh no, it was Franca. Immediately came out and pushed him to the fence. Beneil Dariush did the same thing, but he got better through the fight, getting off the fence. He sort of panicked early on. But getting stuck on the fence against Gaethje is obviously bad news. But again, I'm going to write about this in a minute, so look out on Vice for that, or thefightprimer.com to find all my work. I think I'm probably going to write something about this stupid KSI Logan Paul fight at the weekend, because I watched who was it, Joe whoever versus KSI thing, and it was hilarious. These guys in the front row who were clearly part of the posse or something, these dudes in extravagant clothes, like you would go to the front row of a Mayweather fight in, but they're surrounded by children. It was absolutely fucking bizarre. Right, let's get out of here for this week. If you want to support the podcast and get the Opium Tea and War, or Opium Tea, I haven't decided on a title yet, but the Opium War episode coming this week, and so on, join the Patreon. If you want to know what I'm up to at any time, fightprimer.com. The brand new rewrites of Notorious are coming out imminently. And if you want to send a question to the Fights Gone By podcast, fightsgoneby@gmail.com. Right, I've raved about this fight night, which in many respects is quite mare-looking, but also has some names on. I hope it turns out good. If it doesn't, please don't hate me. I'm your boy Jack Slack. Catch you next week. Cheers.